18:50 p.m., Wednesday, 7th of August 1963. The traveling post office train, or shortly known as the TPO, UP special train set off from the Central Station, Glasgow to the Euston Station situated in London. This was a long journey of 7 hours and 30 minutes. The train was set to reach Euston at 4 a.m. on the morning. There were 12 carriages on the train, and each of the carriages was carrying 72 staff from the post office, who did the sorting of mail during the journey. The first lot of mail was loaded onto the train beginning at the Glasgow station, and mail sacks were hung by the post office staff in line-side collection points in other stations that came during the journey. The post office staff used to hand these sacks in elevated trackside hooks, and these mails were caught by the onboard staff using nets. The onboard staff would also drop off mails that were sorted off at the same time. Back in time, this was a very unique method for onloading mails. This process of onloading and offloading was introduced so that the mails could be distributed locally with this process of exchange. And the train didn't have to stop, and the time for distribution of mails was reduced. This is by date one of the biggest and popular robbery of all time. As a part of history, one of the carriages from the train is preserved at the Nene Valley Railway. The second carriage of the 12 carriages was called the HVP coach. HVP here means the coach of high-value packages that carried large sum of money and did registration of mail for starting. In regular days, the value of the shipment carried by the HVP coach was around £300,000. But the previous weekend was a bank holiday in the UK, and the package carried an amount between £2.5 million to £3 million. To ensure the security of the HVP coach, the Post Office Investigation Branch, shortly known as IB, suggested to attach alarms with all the HVP coaches. The rail took this initiative in 1961 and implanted alarms in the TPOs. However, HVP carriages without any alarm were retained by the rail as reserve. By the August of 1963, the rail fitted alarms in 3 HVP coaches. The alarms were equipped in the doors, bars over windows, etc. During the robbery, the 3 carriages with alarm were out of service, and a reserve carriage without an alarm had been used to carry the money. The investigation branch also suggested to set up radios as an alternate to alarms. But radios were too expensive for implementing in HVP coaches at that time. The carriage was kept as evidence for 7 years, and then it was burnt down by the police to deter any souvenir hunters from stealing it. Now, if you have got the details of the train and the carriage, let's get back to the robbery. To stop the train as per their plan, the robbers tampered with a signal light. This signal light was on the West Coast Main Line at Sears Crossing. This crossing was between Leighton Buzzard and Cheddington. At first, the robbers covered the green light with a glove, and after that, they powered the red light of the signal using a battery. The driver of the train was Jack Mills, who was a 58-year-old driver with vast experience. Jack Mills stopped the train at 3:00 on 8th of August when he got the red signal. But a signal stop was not expected at this place and time. So, the second crew member, who was also called the secondman, climbed down from the cab to call the signalman for knowing the reason. The secondman was a 26-year-old guy, David Whitby. Whitby went to the line-side telephone and found that the wires had been cut off. As he was going back to the train, one of the robbers overpowered him. And, by this time, other gang members entered the engine cabin rapidly from both sides. Mills tried to resist one of the robbers while another robber struck him from the behind, and he fell on the ground. He was beaten with a cosh and was left semi-conscious. After that, the robbers moved the train to the Mentmore Bridge. This bridge was then known as the Bridego Bridge. This bridge was only 800 meters away from another track, where the robbers planned to unload the money of robbery. One of the robbers had spent several months to make friendship with the staff from the railway and slowly started learning about the layout and the operation conducted by the railway. However, the robbers decided to carry the locomotive and the first 2 carriages from the signal to the bridge with the help of an experienced driver. For this reason, they hired an experienced driver referred to as Stan Agate. Stan Agate was an experienced driver who had already retired from driving trains. But there was a big problem. As he approached to drive the locomotive, he failed as technology had been changed and he was unfamiliar to the new methods for driving trains. He attempted and failed to drive the train. In this situation, the gang decided that they would have to use Jack Mills for this operation. One of the team members was Ronnie Biggs, whose only job was to supervise Stan Agate while driving the train. As it was confirmed that Agate would not drive the train, Biggs and Agate was sent to the waiting truck for loading the mail bags. The robbers took the train to the bridge and the assault force from the robber gang attacked the HVP. The postal worker in charge of the carriage was Frank Deworst, and 3 other subordinates, John O'Connor, Leslie Penn and Joseph Ware, were working with him in the carriage. The assistant inspector of the train was Thomas Kett, who was also in the carriage. The assault group initially hit Thomas Kett and Frank Deworst while they tried to stop them from the robbery. As the robbers were armed when they entered the carriage, the staff couldn't put up resistance against them. Also, there were no police officer or security guard to put up a fight against the robbers. The robbers made the staff lie down on the ground by putting their face down on the floor in the corner of the carriage. The train drivers, Mills and Whitby, were also brought into the carriage and they were handcuffed together. The robbers then put the 2 down beside the staff too. There were 128 sacks and the robber took 120 of them from the carriage. As mentioned earlier, the waiting truck was really close to the bridge and the robbers created a human chain to take the sacks to the truck. The robbers created a line of humans forming little distance and transferred all the money using the chain. It took them only 15 to 20 minutes for transferring the robbed sacks to the waiting truck. The waiting truck was a Austin Lodestar truck, and the gang departed from the place. It took them around 30 minutes to complete this huge robbery. The robbers used 2 Land Rover vehicles, with the same number plate, BMG 757A, to confuse any potential witness and mislead them. The gang then traveled using minor roads where police protection was lower. And they were continuously listening to the police broadcasts on a VHF radio to find out if the news broke out or not. The gang traveled 1 hour from the bridge, arrived at Leather Slade Farm around 4:30. It took them only 30 minutes to complete the robbery and 1 hour 30 minutes to complete the whole process. It was also when the news broke out. However, the robbers thought it would take time to raise alarm and the news would reach the police after 4:30. But a staff from the train caught a passing goods train going towards Cheddington and raised an alarm. Then, the news broke out exactly at 4:20. Leather Slade was a farm which was 43 kilometers away from the crime scene. The farm was brought 2 months earlier, the crime as the hideout of the group. The money was divided into 16 full shares and some smaller shares were kept for several associates who helped in the robbery from distant. Different source suggests different amount to be the exact sum of money as the shares. But most trustworthy sources tell, each of the full share was of £150,000 each. If you calculate inflation and calculate the value of this £150,000 in today's market, it is more than £3 million per person. From the police tuned radio, they came to the understanding that the danger of getting caught wasn't over. From the investigation, the police had calculated that the gang was hiding within 50-kilometer radius from the crime scene. And the hideout was exactly 43 kilometers away from the crime scene. The information was provided by a witness who was told by a robber, "Do not move for half an hour." Based on this information, the police estimated that a 50-kilometer radius will cover the hideout. The gang understood that the police was setting traps for them by using media. This technique of setting up criminals by confusing them with media is one kind of dragnet tactic. So, the gang brought forward the idea of leaving the farm from Sunday to Friday. The robbery was executed on Thursday. However, the gang couldn't use the cars they used for escaping this time as the staff of the train already saw those cars. Brian Field was another gang member who played a very important role in the robbery. He was the organizer of the mock buy of the farm as the hideout 2 months earlier. He came to the farm on Thursday to pick his share and also took Roy James with him to London where they would find an extra vehicle. Bruce Richard Reynolds was the leader of this master plan. He and John Daly picked up 2 cars. The first car was for Jimmy White. And the second car was for Reynolds, Daly, Biggs, and the driver Agate. Brian Field, with the help of his associate Mark and his wife Karen, brought the vans from London and drove the other members of the gang to their house. They didn't finish yet. The gang knew that the police would ultimately find out the farm as the hideout. So, Field and Mark had to carry out an all-inclusive cleanup and set fire on the farm after all the other members drove away. This way, they could wipe out their prints before moving from the place. The robbers also spent much time in wiping out their prints before they moved out from the farm. Setting out fire was only the end of the process. As he took the help of Mark for this job, he paid him £10,000 for setting up the fire. However, the gang members doubted their strategy of cleaning up and called upon a meeting on Monday, 2 days after they left the farm. And, this time Field admitted the truth. The hideout was never burnt by Mark. Mark took the money from Field and never went to do his job. The gang members stormed over Field. But they knew it was the job that needed to be done. So, they planned again to fire the hideout as soon as possible. But after deciding on it, they learned that the police had already found the hideout. This is where the story turned. After the police found out the hideout, the investigation got a strong upper hand. The first gang member who was caught by the police was Roger Corddry. Corddry was the leader of a raider gang named the South Coast Raiders. Some other gang members from the South Coast Raiders were also part of the robbery. The role of Corddry in the robbery was to stop the train with his electronic skills. Corddry was an electronics expert who tampered the signal lights for stopping the train. He was with a friend named William Bowell who was helping Corddry hide in return of prior debts. They rented an apartment in Wimborne Road, Moordown, Bournemouth. To remain relaxed and safe, Bowell and Corddry paid the apartment owner 3 months of rents in advance, which made her doubt them. Another mistake was that they paid her the rent using 10-shilling notes. As she doubted something was fishy, the apartment owner tipped off the police. Though Bowell was not involved in the robbery, was imprisoned for 24 years. And he died in 1970 because of illness in prison. The police then recognized the matter as a miscarriage of justice. He was caught by the police in 14th of August, which was only 1 week after the robbery. After the arrest of Roger Corddry, the police started to catch them one after one. By the end of 1963, 10 of the gang members were caught by the police, including Roger Corddry. The other members from the South Coast Raiders were also caught by the end of 1963, except one. Danny Pembroke was one of the members of the South Coast Raiders and also worked as a muscle during the robbery. Was never caught by the police. He died in 2015. After his death, in 2019, one of his sons revealed in a documentary that Pembroke was one of the robbers. The leader of the robbery, Bruce Richard Reynolds, was caught 5 years after the robbery in 5th of November 1968. Reynolds first moved to Mexico with his family and started living a lavish life. But within a few years, money ran out. So, he first went to Canada and then France using false identities. He was still unable to find suitable job. In 1968, Reynolds returned to the United Kingdom to search for jobs using old contacts. But that was the mistake of him. He was caught in the November of 1968. After 10 years of imprisonment, he was released in 1978. As most of the gang members were caught by the end of 1963, the organizer of the robbery, Ronald Christopher Edwards, voluntarily surrendered to the police in the year 1966. All the gang members were caught within these few years, except a few. As mentioned earlier, one of them was Danny Pembroke. While there has been a lot of mystery about the involvement of people in the robbery, the police almost instantly know about the people who were involved in the robbery. Within 22 days of the robbery, the police had 14 names. But still 4 people got to escape from the police. They were Danny Pembroke, Harry Smith, a fair-haired man, and a man named Jimmy Collins. However, the police were unsure about the name of Jimmy Collins. One of the main reasons why all the robbers were identified was Field's inability to fire the hideout. It left significant evidence to the police that helped them to determine the criminals easily. As mentioned earlier, Pembroke's son revealed his father's involvement in the robbery. He also revealed that his father escaped detection as he always wore gloves while they were in the hideout and left no prints. Also, he never used the washroom in the hideout and used to go out for toilet. According to investigators, the 3 robbers who got away were Frank Monroe, Alf Thomas, and Bill Jennings. The Great Train Robbery is seen as the greatest bank robberies of all time, where the robbers took £2.3 million. If you calculate inflation and estimate the gross amount taken by the robbers, it is more than £60 million in today's market. According to the press, the exact amount of money robbed was £2,631,684, and according to the police, it was £2,595,997. The gang took 636 packages of money that was in 120 mail bags. Most of the money was in £1 and £5 notes. There was also 10 shilling notes, Scottish notes, and Irish notes. The weight of the bags moved by the robbers was 2.5 tons. With the help of inside information, the robbers executed this big crime that didn't only stun England but also the world. This robbery is seen as one of the most organized and popular robberies which is a part of the history of the last century. Almost 90% of the money was never recovered. And one epic thing about this robbery is, they never used any firearms for doing the job. Only metal bars were used to execute this thrilling robbery. The driver Mills, who were beaten by the metal bars and then drove the train to the robbers' methodical location. As he was injured during the event, he was given lighter duties after his recovery. Mills died in 1970 and he was traumatized by the events of the robbery, for which he never got proper treatment. However, most of the members were given 30 years of imprisonment. But most of them appealed and were released within a decade of their imprisonment.